At my granddaughter's first birthday party, my son-in-law picked up the wooden memory box I'd spent 3 months building for her, turned it over once, and set it on the gift table with the same expression you'd use for a parking ticket. "Cute," he said, and walked away. My daughter laughed, the nervous laugh I'd been hearing for 4 years. That night, my son-in-law called me from the driveway of their house, voice so tight I barely recognized it. "Mum," he said, and then he stopped. "What exactly did you put inside that box?" "My name is Harriet Blythe. I'm 67 years old, and for 32 years, I ran a small woodworking and restoration studio out of a converted garage in Stratford, Ontario. I refinished Victorian sideboards and built custom bookshelves and repaired the wobbly legs on dining tables that had been in families longer than I had. I know wood the way a musician knows pitch, by feel, by grain, by the way a piece of maple sounds different than oak when you tap it with 2 knuckles. My hands are not gentle hands. They are sanded and scarred, and they have built things that will outlast me by decades. My husband Ray passed 22 months before that birthday party. 41 years of marriage, and then a November morning at Stratford General, and then a house that went very, very quiet. Ray was not a complicated man. He coached minor hockey for 16 years. He made terrible puns and expected you to laugh every single time. He spent every Sunday morning reading the Beacon Herald at the kitchen table, with his reading glasses pushed up on his forehead even though he needed them to see the page. And when I pointed this out for the 100th time, he'd say, "I know where they are, Harriet," as if that were the point. But Ray was a saver, not in the anxious way, not in the hoarding way, in the patient, quiet way of a man who understood that time compounds things. He bought Canada Savings bonds the way other men bought lottery tickets, small amounts, regularly, without fanfare, a 50 here, 100 there, every year for as long as I could remember. He kept them in a fireproof box in the closet behind his winter coats, and I'd known they were there for 30 years without ever sitting down to count them. The summer before Lily was born, Lily, our granddaughter, our daughter's first child, Ray sat me down at the kitchen table. He was already not well by then, though we were both still pretending otherwise. He had his reading glasses on his forehead. "Of course. The bonds," he said. "I want them to go to the baby." I said we didn't know if it was a boy or a girl yet. "Doesn't matter," he said. "I've been adding to it since Joanna turned 8. Figured someday there'd be a grandchild. Wanted to make sure there was something waiting." He reached across the table and squeezed my hand, and his grip was still strong then, still Ray. "Don't just hand them an envelope, Harriet. You know how Declan is about money." I knew how Declan was about money. Put them somewhere they'll keep. Build something. Build her something she'll open herself. He didn't live to see Lily born. She arrived the following March, and Ray had been gone since January, and the first time I held her, this small, furious, red-faced person with Ray's exact stubborn chin, I had to sit down in the hospital chair and press my face into the top of her head so nobody would see me cry. I knew what I had to do. Ray had asked me to build something, and so I built something. I started the box in April, 6 weeks after the funeral, partly for Lily. Partly because I needed my hands to have a reason. I used a piece of quarter-sawn white oak I'd been holding onto for 20 years, the kind with the ray flecks that catch the light like satin. It took me 3 months, working slowly, working carefully, the way I hadn't worked since the arthritis started making itself known in my right knuckles. A small blanket chest, really. 18 inches long, 12 wide, with hand-cut dovetails at the corners and a carved border of small maple leaves along the lid, because this child was born in Canada, and Ray would have wanted something that marked the place. On the inside of the lid, in letters I routed by hand, I carved, "For the one we were getting ready for, Grandpa Ray." Then I did what Ray had asked. I lined the false bottom with cedar, good for keeping, good for years, and into it I laid the bonds. I'd finally sat down and counted them the week after the funeral, with my reading glasses on and his fireproof box open on the table. Ray had been buying them since Joanna was in grade school. Canada Savings bonds, Series S, and the later premium bonds, a careful stack of them organized by year in his blocky handwriting on the rubber-banded envelopes. The total, Once I'd gone through every last one, was just under $43,000. I held that number in my hands for a long time. I also put in a letter. Ray hadn't been able to dictate one. The end was faster than we'd planned for. But I had found, tucked into the back of his coaching notebook, a single index card in his handwriting. He must have written it sometime in those last weeks, when I wasn't in the room. It said, "To whoever you are when you find this, your grandfather thought about you for a long time before you existed. Spend this on something that lasts. Be kind. Don't put your reading glasses on your forehead. Love, Grandpa Ray." I put the card in a small envelope and sealed it and wrote on the front, "Open when you're old enough to understand the joke." I fitted the cedar panel back over the bonds and the letter and ran a thin bead of hide glue along the edge. The kind that holds without being permanent, the kind a patient person with the right tool could open someday. I finished the exterior in a hand-rubbed oil that would need refreshing every few years, which I intended to be the point. A thing you have to care for is a thing you keep. I wrapped it in brown paper and tied it with a piece of red ribbon I'd saved. From something. I couldn't even remember what, and I drove to Joanna's house for Lily's first birthday, with the box on the passenger seat where Ray used to sit. I should tell you about Declan, because I don't want to make him a cartoon. He isn't one. He's more specific than that, which is its own kind of sadness. Declan grew up in a family that measured success in visible, legible ways. His father was a commercial real estate developer in Mississauga who believed that the quality of a man could be read in his watch and his car and the neighborhood he chose to live in. Declan is not a bad man. He is funny when he's relaxed. He loves Joanna in his way. He loved Lily the moment she was born with a ferocity that surprised me and probably surprised him. But Declan has never known what to do with me. I am a woman who drives a dented Subaru and makes things with her hands, and whose idea of a good Saturday is refinishing a cabinet in a cold garage, and I do not fit any template he was given, growing up, for what a mother-in-law is supposed to represent. He is polite to me the way you're polite to a distant relative whose name you're not quite sure of, carefully, at a slight distance. Joanna knows this. She manages it. She's always managed it, ever since they got together, choosing easier, keeping the peace, smoothing the space between the two of us with cheerful small talk and deliberate subject changes. She learned that from somewhere, and it wasn't from me, so I know where she learned it, and I've chosen not to say so. They'd built the birthday party the way Declan builds everything, with a clear concept and a budget that announced itself. A Wild One theme in forest green and terracotta, a custom cake from a bakery in Kitchener, a gift table with a printed banner above it. Joanna's friends from her NCT group were there, and Declan's colleagues and their wives, and a few of our family friends who had known Ray. I arrived carrying my brown paper package and stood for a moment in the foyer, feeling like I'd walked into a magazine layout. My sister-in-law, Bet, was already there. Bet is 71 and has the useful quality of saying exactly what she thinks approximately 4 seconds before social convention would prefer. She found me in the foyer and hugged me and looked at my package and said, "Is that the box?" Ray told me about the box last summer. Ray had told Bet. Of course he had. They'd been close, those two, the easy sibling closeness of people who'd grown up teasing each other and never fully stopped. "You should tell Joanna before she opens it," Bet said quietly. "So she's careful with the bottom panel." I shook my head. Ray's instruction had been specific. Build something she has to open herself. Let them find it. Bet looked at me for a moment with an expression I recognized from 40 years of knowing her. "You always did love a slow reveal," she said, "just like him." I should have listened to Bet. The gift opening was the centerpiece of the party. Joanna sat on the floor with Lily in her lap, and Declan stood behind them, taking photos, and the friends and family arranged themselves around the living room in a loose circle. Lily, for her part, was primarily interested in the tissue paper. The gifts were generous. A hand-painted name sign for the nursery. A cashmere blanket set from a boutique brand I'd never heard of. An educational toy made of sustainably sourced wood. The kind of wood that comes with a certificate rather than a history. Declan narrated each one for the photos with the comfortable authority of a man who knows the correct price of everything in the room. My package was near the end. Joanna picked it up and smiled at the brown paper and the red ribbon. "From Grandma Harriet," she said, warmly. The way she says things she means. She passed the box to Lily to tear the paper, which Lily did with the focused intensity of a small person who has just discovered her primary talent. The box came through the paper, and for one moment, one good moment, I saw Joanna's face register what it was. The dovetails, the grain, the carved maple leaves. She ran her thumb along the lid and her eyes went soft. "Oh, Mum," she said, "this is gorgeous." Then Declan leaned in to look. I watched him process it, the absence of a brand, the hand-cut joints, the slightly uneven spacing of one of the maple leaves on the right side where my knuckles had made me pay for it. The mind of a man raised to read labels working through a thing that doesn't have one. "Did you make this?" he said, not unkindly, but in the tone of a person for whom handmade is a category that exists slightly outside the main register of value. Joanna said yes, and I started to lean forward. I was going to say there's something inside it, there's a false bottom, run your finger along the cedar, but Lily had already grabbed the lid and yanked, and the box was open, and there was the carved inscription on the lid, and there were the cedar walls, and the panel looked exactly like the floor of the box. Nobody was going to feel it unless they knew to feel it. Declan took the box from Lily before she could gnaw on the corner. He turned it over in his hands, tilting it, checking the joins with the eye of someone who has watched too many home renovation shows. And then he did something I didn't expect. He set it on the gift table, not with any ceremony, not unkindly, not cruelly. This is what I have to keep reminding myself when I replay it. He set it down the way you set down something you've assessed and filed. A nice thing, a handmade thing, done. "Very nice work," he said, in the tone you use to close a subject. Then he turned to the next gift. I sat there in the armchair I'd been given, the one near the edge, where there was a good sightline to Lily, and I felt the specific feeling of being neatly categorized and placed to one side. Not thrown away. Filed, which is its own thing entirely. I might have left it. I might have told myself it was fine. There'd be a quiet moment later to tell Joanna about the false bottom, about the bonds, about Ray's card. I might have gone home and called her that evening and handled it privately. But Bet was watching me from across the room with an expression that said she'd seen exactly what I'd seen, and she mouthed two words at me. "Tell her." I hesitated. Ray had said to let them find it. But Ray had also probably not anticipated the box being assessed and filed in 45 seconds flat. I was still deciding when Declan picked up the box again. I thought, for a moment, with a start of hope, that he'd felt the weight, that he'd noticed the bottom wasn't quite right, but he was just moving it to make room on the table. He stacked it to the side under a gift bag. Under a gift bag. And I thought about Ray buying savings bonds since Joanna was in grade school. I thought about the index card in the coaching notebook. I thought about the cedar and the hide glue and 3 months of careful work with knuckles that complained every morning. And I thought, no, I'm not leaving this under a gift bag. I stood up. I crossed to the gift table quietly. I picked up my box. Declan looked over. "Did you want to?" "I'll take it home," I said. My voice was even. I was very calm. "For safekeeping. There's something inside that needs explaining, and I'd rather do that properly." I smiled at him and at Joanna, who was watching me now with a look that was trying to figure out what had just shifted in the room. "Wonderful party," I said. "Lily is perfect. I'm just going to slip away early." My back. It wasn't my back. But Declan had already moved on, and Joanna was being called over by someone with a question about cake, and I tucked the box under my arm and found Bet near the coats and said goodbye quietly. I didn't cry until I was on Highway 7 heading home. Not from humiliation. I want to be clear about that. From missing Ray. From thinking about him buying those bonds for 20-something years and writing that card and trusting me to get this right. I'd been so certain that the box would do the work, that someone would feel the weight and say, "There's something inside this," and we'd have the moment Ray had asked for. Instead, I was driving home with it on the passenger seat again. "I'm so sorry, Ray," I said, to the empty seat. But here's what I have learned in 67 years. Grief and clarity travel together. By the time I turned onto my street, something underneath the grief had gone very quiet and very certain. The money was safe. The card was safe. Nobody had touched what was actually precious because nobody had known to look. And Declan's reaction, that assessment, that filing, had told me something important. The bonds were for Lily. Ray had said so, specifically. Not for Lily's household, not for Lily's parents to manage at their discretion. For Lily. And a man who sets a handmade oak chest under a gift bag to clear table space, without once asking about its weight, is not a man I was prepared to hand $43,000 to without some structure around it. Ray had thought in decades. I was going to have to start doing the same. Bet called before I'd even taken my coat off. I could hear the party still audible in the background. Are you all right? I'm fine. I have it. It's safe. A pause. Harriet, I have to tell you something. After you left, Declan said something to his colleague. Something about, she stopped. He said it was nice, the box. He said, Harriet makes things. It's her thing. His tone was, I know the tone, I said. His colleague asked if there was anything in it, and Declan said he didn't think so, just the box itself. Another pause. And then I'm sorry, Harriet, I wasn't thinking, I was just so. I said to him, there's $43,000 in bonds in that box and a letter from Ray. Just like that, I said it out loud. I closed my eyes. His face, Bet said. Oh, his face. I could imagine the face. I had known Declan for 4 years. He went straight to Joanna, Bet said. They went into the kitchen. The door closed. I thanked her and hung up and stood in my entryway with the box and understood that across town, in a kitchen with a closed door, a very specific reckoning was happening. Declan, who had filed my box under a gift bag, had just learned it contained more money than most people keep in a savings account. And Joanna, who had been smoothing and managing between us for 4 years, was in that kitchen with him. I put the kettle on. I waited. Because I knew, the way you know things when you've been a mother for 34 years, that the phone would ring. While I waited, I went to my workshop and turned on the lamp over my bench and set the box in the light and opened it carefully. I lifted the cedar panel with the small tool I'd built for exactly that purpose. A thin blade on a wooden handle. The bonds were exactly as I'd laid them. 30-something years of Ray's patience in rubber-banded envelopes, each one labeled in his handwriting. The small sealed envelope with the index card. Open when you're old enough to understand the joke. I held that envelope for a long time. I thought about the coaching notebook and the index card tucked in the back. The private act of a man writing to a grandchild who didn't exist yet, making sure something of himself would be in the room decades after he wasn't. I replaced the panel. I went back to the kitchen. The kettle had boiled and I'd missed it. The phone rang 14 minutes after I'd hung up with Bet. It was Declan. I had not expected it to be Declan. I'd expected Joanna. Harriet. His voice was different, tighter, stripped of the careful politeness. I need to ask you something directly. Of course, I said. Bet told me what's in the box. I need to know. Is it still there? It's right here on my workbench, I said. All of it, completely untouched. The sound he made was not quite relief. It was more complicated than relief. It was the sound of a man recalculating something significant. I didn't know, he said. No, I said. You didn't. A long silence. Then, what are you going to do with it? I want to tell you about that question, because it's the hinge of everything that happened after. Not, I'm so sorry. Not, what was in it exactly. Not, can we come over? The first question, the immediate question, was what are you going to do with it? I've thought about that question a lot since. I don't think Declan is a greedy man, exactly. I think he's a man for whom financial information immediately becomes financial planning, the way a carpenter's eye goes automatically to a joint. It's just how he's built. But it told me what I needed to know about the structure I was going to need to put around this gift. I'm going to do what Ray asked, I said. I'm going to give it to Lily. Another pause. Right. Yes, of course, through us, obviously we can. Through a trust, I said gently, a registered education savings plan to start, and then we'll look at a formal trust structure for the remainder. Locked, for Lily's education and her start in life. administered independently. I kept my voice warm and clear, the way I speak to people in my workshop when I'm explaining why something has to be built a certain way. Ray saved it for the child, Declan. I intend to honor that exactly as he intended it. Silence. He stopped. Restarted. That seems like a lot of formality for a family. It's what Ray would have wanted, I said. And it's what I'm going to do. The box comes back to Lily when I can see it'll be looked after. I hadn't planned that last part, but I found, as I said it, that I meant it completely. He called Joanna to the phone. I could hear him, muffled, handing it over, and then my daughter's voice, careful and quiet, not wanting to be overheard. Mum, I'm so sorry about the party. I didn't know. I didn't realize. I know, sweetheart. Declan didn't mean. He wasn't trying to. I know that, too. A pause. He feels terrible. I let that sit for a moment without agreeing or disagreeing with it, because I wasn't entirely sure it was true, and I have a rule about confirming things I'm not sure of. Joanna, I said, I want one thing. I want us all in a room together. You, Declan, Bet. And I want to give Lily her grandfather's gift properly, the way Ray asked me to, out loud, with everyone watching. I could hear her breathing. He said, make them find it, I said, so we're going to find it together. Just a little later than planned. It took 2 weeks to arrange, partly because I spent the time in between making phone calls and doing things that needed doing before any gathering could happen. I went to my bank with the bonds and sat with a very patient woman named, well, she was patient, and that's the part that mattered, who confirmed the value and walked me through the process for cashing them and setting up a registered education savings plan. The bonds were worth $43,200 and some change. Every dollar of it from Ray's quiet, patient, decades-long accumulation. Then I went to see an estate lawyer in Stratford who handles these things. We discussed the RIAS-EP structure for the educational portion and a separate informal trust arrangement for the remainder. It took 2 appointments and a fair amount of paperwork and cost me enough that I noticed it, but not so much that I reconsidered. The point was to make it clean, to make it exactly what Ray had intended and nothing else, Lily's and Lily's only. Not a household fund, not a family asset, not something that could quietly become a down payment on an investment property in the event that someone decided the family needed one. I kept the box, I kept the letter. I decided those would wait for the room. They came on a Saturday afternoon in October, the light already going orange by 3 o'clock the way it does in Ontario in the fall. I'd made soup because some things don't require explanation, and I'd set the table with Ray's mother's china because I wanted the room to feel like what it was, an occasion. The box sat in the center of the table where a centerpiece would go. Declan saw it the moment he walked in. Something moved across his face, not guilt exactly. More like the expression of a man who is preparing for something he knows is coming and doesn't know how to position himself in relation to it. Joanna had Lily on her hip. Bet had arrived early and was already at my elbow, where she'd been every significant moment of my adult life. We ate first. I insist on this. I found that difficult things go better on a full stomach, and I'd rather have everyone settled and slightly warm from soup before anything important gets said. We talked about Lily, who was interested in my pepper grinder and had to be redirected 3 times. We talked about the fall colors on the drive-in. It was almost pleasant. Declan complimented the soup with something that sounded like it surprised him a little, and I thanked him and meant it. Then I cleared the bowls and sat back down and put my hand flat on the box. I'd like to give Lily her grandfather's gift now, I said, properly, the way Ray asked. The table went quiet. Joanna reached over and took Declan's hand. I noticed that she did it without looking at him. Automatic, steadying, the gesture of a woman who has been managing the space between people for a long time. Declan, I said, and I kept my voice the same way I keep my hands when I'm doing delicate work. Steady, no excess force. You held this box at Lily's party, and you decided what it was. I'd like to show you and everyone here what you were actually holding. I picked up the small blade from beside my plate. I opened the cedar panel in front of all of them. Slowly, the way you reveal a dovetail joint. Not for drama, but because the process is part of the point. I lifted out the rubber-banded envelopes first and laid them on the table, one stack at a time. The paper was yellowed at the edges, on the oldest ones, Ray's handwriting darker or lighter depending on the pen he'd had to hand. Decades of small decisions laid out in a row. Canada savings bonds, I said. Ray bought them for 30 years, since Joanna was 8 years old. I smoothed the oldest envelope, the one that said 1991 in Ray's handwriting. The envelope in his fireproof box said, "For the one we don't know yet." I let that land. They've all matured. They're worth $43,000. The number moved through the room like weather. Bet had her eyes on Declan. I wasn't watching him. I was watching Joanna, and Joanna had her hand over her mouth. "And this," I said, setting down the small sealed envelope the way you set a full glass down on an uneven surface, with attention, "is the last thing Ray ever wrote. I found it in his coaching notebook after he died. It's for Lily." I touched the front, where I'd written in my own hand, "Open when you're old enough to understand the joke. Someday she'll read it and she'll know who he was," in his own words. Not in mine, not in yours. His. Nobody spoke. Lily, for her part, was methodically unwrapping a napkin ring. "Ray's exact words to me," I said, "were build something she has to open herself. Let them find it. Don't just hand them an envelope." I looked up and I looked at Declan, and I made sure my voice was kind, because I meant it to be, and because kindness at the moment of truth is the thing that can't be argued with. "What you held at that party was $43,000, and the last thing your daughter's grandfather ever wrote. You set it under a gift bag to clear table space." Declan had gone very still. He wasn't defensive. That surprised me. He was doing something else, working through something. I could see it on his face, the way a calculation registers. "I didn't know what I was doing," he said. "No," I said, "but I want you to know now. All of you." I folded my hands on the table. "The money is already in a registered education savings plan in Lily's name. I've also arranged a trust structure for the remainder. It's locked. Lily's, for her education and her start. It can't be redirected. It can't be borrowed against. It's administered independently, and it stays that way until she's old enough to need it." I held Declan's gaze steadily. "Ray thought in decades. I've arranged this so his intention stays intact for as long as it needs to." Joanna said, "Mom," and stopped. "I know it might feel like a lack of trust," I said. "It isn't. It's precision. Ray wanted this to reach Lily intact. The cleanest way to honor that is to make it impossible to redirect, even unintentionally, even by people with the best intentions." I paused. "I'm not exempting myself from that. The trust is independent of all of us." Declan was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "He'd been doing this since Joanna was 8. "Since she was 8, I said. He looked at the row of envelopes on the table. His jaw worked, and then he did something I was not prepared for. He reached out and picked up the 1991 envelope very carefully, with both hands, as if it had become something different in the last 10 minutes. Which, I suppose, it had. 30 years, he said quietly, more to himself than to anyone. 32, I said. There was a silence that felt different from the silences before it. Then I told them about the box, because the rest still needed saying. "The box comes back to Lily when I can see it'll be kept," I said. "Not because I'm punishing anyone. Because a thing isn't safe in a house that hasn't learned what it's holding yet." I looked at Joanna. "I'm Lily's grandmother, not a courtesy relative. I'll be in her life fully. Sunday dinners, school concerts, scraped knees, the whole of it. Those aren't negotiable." I kept my voice warm. "But neither is this." No one argued. I opened the small outer envelope then, the one Ray hadn't sealed, the one addressed to all of us, because Ray, like all people who love slowly and quietly, had thought ahead. "He wrote 2 things, I said. "One is for Lily at 18. This part is for now." My hands weren't entirely steady, but they were steady enough. "If you're reading this," I read, "then I didn't make it to the good part. I'm sorry about that. I wanted to be there for the fishing and the terrible jokes. I've been putting money away since Joanna was in grade 3, because my own grandfather did something like it for me, and I have never forgotten that someone was thinking about me before I was someone. That's what's in whatever Harriet built. Proof that you were expected, little one, by someone who never got to meet you." Spend it on something that stays. Be kind to your mother. And whatever you do, learn the difference between what a thing costs and what it's worth. Your grandmother knows the difference. She always has. Love, Grandpa Ray. Bet was weeping. She doesn't make a production of it. She just does it, the same way she does everything else. Joanna had her face pressed to Lily's hair. Her shoulders were shaking. Declan sat very still with the 1991 envelope in his hands, and his expression was the expression of a man who has had something rearranged inside him, and who is honest enough not to pretend otherwise. I folded Ray's note and set it down gently. The hard part is done, I said, in the tone I use when I'm finishing a piece. Not triumphant, just accurate. Now we can breathe. We had tea. Lily ate most of a shortbread biscuit and distributed the remainder across my kitchen floor. Bet told a story about Ray that none of us had heard before, something from when they were teenagers, and we all laughed, and it was real laughter, the kind that surprises you. Before Declan left, he stood in my entryway with his jacket on and looked at the box, which I'd set on the side table by the door. I went to put it to one side, he said, not quite an apology. More like a man saying something factual about himself that he's decided to stop flinching from. I do that. I sort things. I didn't. He stopped. I didn't know how to look at it. I know, I said. Joanna said you build things to last. It's the only kind worth building. He nodded once, the small nod of a man making a private note. Then he went out to where Joanna was buckling Lily into the car seat, and I watched him get in, and I stood in the doorway until the taillights were out of sight. Bet appeared at my shoulder. Well, she said. Well, I said. Ray would have been insufferable about this, she said, in the best possible way. Absolutely insufferable, I agreed. He'd have made a pun. At least 4. I closed the door against the October cold. Here is how things have settled in the months since, because I know you want the honest ledger, not just the feeling of it. The recep is open and growing. The trust structure is in place. $43,000 sitting quietly for Lily the way Ray always intended, patiently, in the background, compounding. She won't touch it for years, and that's exactly the point. Ray thought in decades. Now so does her future. Declan and I are different. Not close. I want to be accurate about that, not sentimental. But different. He came to the workshop once to return a clamp he'd borrowed, and he stood for 10 minutes watching me fit a drawer, asking real questions. Not polite questions. Actual questions about the joinery, about why I'd chosen quarters on for that piece, about how long it takes to learn to read grain. He's not built the way I'm built, and I don't expect him to become that, but he was paying attention in a way he hadn't before, and that's not nothing. Joanna and I have dinner every other week, just the two of us. We always did. But she comes differently now. Less managing, more just being there. Whatever she was smoothing between me and her household before, she seems to have set a little of it down. I haven't asked her about it directly. Some things a person has to arrive at herself. The box lives in my workshop for now, under the good lamp, where I can see the grain. I'm refinishing the lid, a small thing, just oiling it more carefully, working with the grain the way you have to when a piece is going to be kept for a long time. When I can see that the house it's going into knows what it's holding, the box will go to Lily. I'll know when. You know, after enough years of caring for things, when something is ready to be trusted. I'm making her something else in the meantime. A small chair, the right height for a child of 3, with her initials inlaid in maple on the back. Ray's middle initial is in there too, small, in the lower corner, where she'll have to look to find it. She'll find it someday. That's the thing about Handmade. It keeps its secrets at the right pace. Build something that lasts. Build it with the grain, not against it. And if someone sets it aside without asking what's inside, well, then you bring it home and you find a better moment. And the thing you built keeps being worth what it was worth without needing anyone to see it. Ray knew that. I know it now better than ever. That's the whole of it. A wooden box, a fireproof bin full of patience, and a love that had been getting ready for 30 years before there was anyone to give it to.